Welcome to We Learn Virtual Learning Network. This is session number 5, The Making of Indian Constitution. Topics which we will cover in this session are the meaning of constitutional government, the roots of the Constituent Assembly of India, the Cabinet Mission Plan, the grouping controversy, composition of the prosperous Constituent Assembly and interim government, the Constituent Assembly and partition, parties in the Constituent Assembly, work of the Constituent Assembly, status of the Constituent Assembly. Coming towards the first topic, that is the meaning of constitutional government. Two kinds of constitution in the democratic world are the constitution that have grown gradually over decades and centuries through customs, conventions, legislative enactments and judicial decisions, and the other is the constitutions that were framed by representative assemblies. Next is the root of the Constituent Assembly of India. The idea of a Constituent Assembly to frame a constitution for a country was aligned to the British imperial practice. It was first demanded by the Indian National Congress in 1934. The Muslim League was opposed to it because it suspected that a Constituent Assembly elected by adult franchise would be dominated by the Congress, whom the League considered to be a Hindu party. Next is the Cabinet Mission Plan. In January 1946, there were elections to the provincial legislatures. In March the same year, a committee of the British Cabinet known as the Cabinet Mission, led by Sir Patrick Lawrence, visited India to assess the Indian political situation and frame the scheme of making a constitution for India. The Cabinet Mission held a conference at Shimla to bring about an understanding among the major political parties, but failed to achieve it. Coming towards the Constituent Assembly. The plan made by the Cabinet Mission recommended for the Constituent Assembly consisting of the representative of all the major groups. The Cabinet Mission thought that though the ideal way to form it would be through election on the basis of adult suffrage, there was no time left for that. Next is the federal formula. The Cabinet Mission held that as the Muslims were apprehensive of a unitary Hindu majority state, the constitutional structure should be federal. The province should have maximum autonomy and the central government should have minimum power such as on foreign affairs, defense and communication. The union would include not only the British Indian province but also the princely states. Next is the three-tier federation. The Cabinet Mission made an extraordinary proposal. Province should be free to form groups with executives and legislators, and each group could determine the provincial subject to be taken in common. This would create a third tier of government between the union and the provinces, hitherto unknown to the federal practice. Next, coming towards the odd procedure. The Cabinet Mission itself laid down a procedure for the Constituent Assembly that would necessarily create groups in the communal way. Procedures, providence would sit in 3 sections as determined by the mission. 2 of such sections would be Muslim majority and the third section would be Hindu majority. The Hindu majority section, section A, would be made up of province of Madras, Bombay, United Province Bihar, Central Province and Orissa. Section B would comprise Punjab, Balochistan, the Northwest Frontier Province and Sindh. Section C would be made up of Assam and Bengal. Assam itself was not a Muslim majority province, but Bengal and Assam together would be a Muslim majority section. And the next is no way out of a group. The fourth extraordinary phenomenon was the formula that once a section formed a group constitution, no province would be free to withdraw from the group it was in. The province could leave such a group only after the first general election held under the group constitution. Now the next topic is the grouping controversy. The groups as a result would be the most important level of government. The group constitution would effectively take precedence over the provincial as well as union constitution. The provincial freedom was a farce. The provinces were free only to join the groups as determined by the cabinet mission. They were free to leave the group only if the group constitution left scope for it. Next topic is composition of the proposed Constituent Assembly. The 292 Constituent Assembly seats were allotted to the governor province according to the strength of their population. The Chief Commissioner province were to be represented by the 4 members. 93 seats were allotted to 566 princely states. It was later agreed between the negotiation committees of the Constituent Assembly and the princes that half the members representing the princely state would be elected and the rest nominated by the princes. Next is an interim government. The cabinet mission proposed that while the work of constitution making would proceed, the government should be carried on by the Governor General with the help of representatives of the major parties. A new executive council was set up, first with the mostly Congress member and then including Muslim leagues. Next is the Constituent Assembly and partition. The difference on the grouping plan for the Constituent Assembly would not be resolved. The Congress agreed to sit in the section but refused to join the group that the section might decide upon. The Muslim League would not join the Constituent Assembly unless the Congress agreed to the grouping agreement set by the Cabinet Mission Plan. Next is the parties in the Constituent Assembly. Partition, in fact, reduced the strength of Constituent Assembly of India by about a third. All parties lost their members through the Congress strength was proportionality increasing. The few more members were later added following arrival of refugees from Pakistan. Most of the representatives of the princely states joined the Constituent Assembly of India. Next is the Congress dominance. In the Constituent Assembly, Congress had an overwhelming majority. But the Congress party had nominated several members from outside the party's fold. Many of them were legal experts and leading legislators in the previous British Indian legislature. Next is the leadership of the Constituent Assembly. There were two broad types of leadership in the Constituent Assembly. These are political as well as technical. The top of this leadership consisted of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad and Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Granville Austin calls the Nehru Patel Azad Prasad team the oligarchy. Below this level, there were the cabinet minister at the center, provincial prime minister, former Congress presidents like Patabhi Sitaramya, an important Congress leader, B.L. Mittal. Of these leaders, K.M. Munshi within the Congress and B.R. Ambedkar from outside combined their technical brilliance with statesmanship, as did some congressmen like K. Shantaram and T.T. Krishnamachari, whose association with the party was not long. Next topic is the opposition in the Constituent Assembly. The cabinet mission had divided the Indians into three communities: the general, the Muslims and the Sikh. The Congress party overwhelmingly dominated the general section and had come into an agreement with the Sikh Akal Panth. The strength of Muslim League had been drastically reduced after partition. The only communist member of the Constitution Assembly, Somnath Lahari, lost his membership after the partition of Bengal. So, B.R. Ambedkar, leader of Scheduled Caste Federation, who had first been elected to the Constitution Assembly from Bengal. Next is the fence sitters. The Congress had nominated not only two Hindu Mahasabha leaders, Mr. M. R. Jayakar and Shyam Prasad Mukherjee, but also two socialist and two forward bloc members. In early 1948, in Socialist and the Forward Bloc served their connections with the Congress and directed its member to resign from the Assembly. The members declined and continued in the Constituent Assembly. Next is the work of the Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly set up a large number of committees on procedural and substantive matter. Some of the committees consulted outside beside discussing issues thoroughly. After preliminary work were completed and the reports of the committee were discussed in the Constituent Assembly, they were forwarded to the drafting committee for incorporation of recommendation in the draft constitution. The draft constitution was moved in the Constituent Assembly. There were 3 readings of the draft constitution in the way all legislations have. Some of the draft provisions were discussed again and again. The debate was through and intensive. After nearly 3 years of work, the Constituent Assembly of India produced the world's biggest written constitution. It was authenticated by the chairman of the Constituent Assembly, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, on 29 November 1949 and came into force on 26 January 1950. Meanwhile, 554 princely states merged with the Republic Indian. Next is the status of Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly had been set up not as the sovereign body. It was expected to draft a commission for enactment by the British government. Partition was a result of the British refusal to treat the Constituent Assembly as a sovereign body. The Indian Independence Act 1947 authorized the Governor General of India to give assent to the Constitution. The Constitution Assembly did not do even what and got the Constitution authenticated by its own chairman. It was an assertion of the sovereign authority of the Constitution Assembly. So that's all for the session. We have following questions based on this session. These are: explain two types of leadership, political and technical. And the second question is: explain the Muslim League did not join the Constituent Assembly. Why? That's all for the session. Thank you. Happy learning. We learning.